All right there, writing workshop. Let's cover quotation mark rules today. Most rules for quotation marks are pretty simple, and they're ones that you know already, so a lot of this should feel like review. There's maybe two rules that are a little bit trickier, so I'm hoping that we can cover those well today. I'm going to hope to work through this video relatively quickly. I know it's a Monday, and you've got other classes to worry about. Please note that your assignment for quotation marks isn't necessarily due today. So I've set a longer deadline on this one, just to give you a little more flexibility with completing it. The idea with doing quotation marks this week is to make sure that you have the tools you need to direct quote within your persuasive research essay. It's a good idea to include at least one direct quote from your research in your essay. Knowing how to use quotation marks will help you to punctuate that well. So let's walk through the rules first. First of all, use double quotation marks to set off a direct quotation, which is exactly what someone says. This is a rule that you know well already. I should note double quotation marks look just like this one right here. So notice right before one dot in, we have an open quote, and then the quote ends after about right here. Those are double quotation marks. We'll talk more about single quotations in a moment. A couple of grammatical notes. Periods and commas are always going to go inside of quotation marks, so you can mark inside right there. The jingle with it is one dot in, two dots out. That's what it's all about. So if you have a period or a comma, so single dot punctuation, they always go inside of quotation marks. If you've got a double dot punctuation mark, like a question mark, an exclamation point, a semicolon, a colon, generally they stay outside of quotation marks. You should also remember to capitalize the first word within a quotation. By the way, as we take notes, I do want you to do this within your assignment, as you note there as well. So it might not be a bad idea to open that up just as you're watching this video, just so you can fill in those blanks too. I don't necessarily dock a ton of points for not taking the notes, but it's a good idea to do that to help you with memory. So here's an example. Notice that we have a quotation from Tommy here. It just says, open quote, "I'll buy the piñata, comma, inside of the quotation marks, end quote, said Tommy." You're usually going to have a verb either right before a quote or right after it. In this case, I could easily flip it and say Tommy said, comma, "I'll buy the piñata, period," to end that sentence. Notice that I'll is capitalized. First of all, because it's the beginning word in a quote. Second of all, because the pronoun I always gets capitalized. There is a your turn sentence right here. Try this one on your own. Feel free to pause the video once again. I'll add quotation marks in just a moment. It says, as Emerson once wrote, trust thyself. Open up the quote. Notice that we have a comma right after wrote. So we begin our quote, trust thyself, period goes inside of the end quotation mark. One dot in, two dots out. We see we have one dot, stays in our quotation marks there. That's the simple rule. That's the one that you already know, probably already know very well with few mistakes. Just remember those punctuation rules, right? Periods and commas inside, double dots outside, capitalize the first word within a quote. Let's talk about something a little bit trickier. If a quotation is broken by a phrase, you do need to close your quotation marks. You don't need to necessarily capitalize when you continue the quote. So this is easier to see in an example. Let's take Tommy again. I'll buy the piñata, comma, said Tommy, another comma instead of a period. So Tommy's continuing his quote right here. Notice that we reopen the quotation marks. We do not capitalize but because it's part of the same sentence as what we saw before. But you owe me big time, period, and quotation mark. So our full quote here is, I'll buy the piñata, comma, but you owe me big time, said Tommy. It is legal to pop said Tommy right between two parts of the same quote, so it's possible to break quotation marks with a phrase like that. Notice that our quotation marks restart. We don't necessarily need to recapitalize. Try that again. I've got a your turn. Light 'em up, screamed Admiral Castillo. Call in an airstrike now. See where you would pop your quotation marks here, and then I'll pop mine in too. All right, so in this one, we see screamed Admiral Castillo, again, right in the middle of this sentence. It's breaking up a quotation. We've got light 'em up. Now on this one, exclamation mark, does it go outside or inside? This is one of those exceptions where it'll stay inside just because it's part of the same quote. Semicolons and colons are always going to go outside of quotation marks. It continues with call right here and ends at the end of the sentence. Notice that I did choose to capitalize call right here just because I can treat that as a separate sentence It actually doesn't matter whether I do that capitalized or lowercase in this situation. You can use whichever you like. I'll leave it capitalized. So notice there are some rules that are fluid with quotation marks. Things like what to do with an exclamation mark or a question mark or capitalization on a broken quote. Use your best judgment on those situations and ask if you have any questions. Use single quotation marks. So this is the trickiest of all quotation mark rules. We're going to use single quotation marks for quotes inside of quotes. Yes, that is possible, and yes, it is tricky as well. So quotes inside of quotes. Here's an example. Maria exclaimed, so you've got a quotation starting here. How can you say indicates another quotation right here. You're not good enough to me. So notice that we've got a quote inside of a quote. Now Maria could have said, how can you say that to me? Not include that additional quote, we would just have these double quotation marks, right? But here, there's another quotation inside of a quotation. That's what single quotation marks are there to clarify. So how can you say, quote, you're not good enough, end quote, to me, end quote. Notice that we've got that quotation inside of a quotation. I want you to try this on your own. I bet you can get this correct if you can compare your turn sentence to our example sentence. See if you can do this one on your own, and then I'll give the answer anyway. I saw a sign that read, "Don't feed the crocodiles," said Ted. Alrighty, let's do it. So, said Ted, we've got our phrase at the end of the sentence. Let's start with a double quote. I saw a sign that read. So read here is telling me that we have another quote here. Single quote, don't feed the crocodiles. Here's where they get really wonky. So single quote to end that, and then a double quote to end the full quotation. We've got a triple quotation mark right there. Said Ted. If this part is confusing to you, that's understandable. This is a really strange rule within our language. You won't see this situation happening very often, but I at least want you to know how to punctuate that if you need a quotation inside of a quotation. Once again, if you are facing the situation inside of an essay and need help, just reach out to me and I can help you with that scenario. One more rule, this one's a little less common. Use quotation marks around a single word to show a difference in usage. This is usually if you are saying something sarcastically, so usually used for sarcasm, or if you're using a slang term. Even in an essay, if you wanted to use a slang term, if you need to use a slang term for the sake of defining it, it'll go in quotation marks. So for example, Mac was studying, but based on the loud noises, I know what he was really doing. So here we're using the term studying sarcastically, right? I'm not saying that Mac was actually studying. I'm saying that he was playing video games based on the loud noises. Or he was playing on his drum set or something like that, instead of actually studying. Or here's one for slang. Planking was the act of laying perfectly flat across a surface. That wasn't really a fad since you guys were in grade school. But I'm using planking as a slang term right there. If I wanted to, I could even say something like, if something is sus to you, it means you are suspicious of it. Something like that. So there I've used another slang term, sus. I wanted to use something a little more modern. Notice that here I've used the sentence to actually define what that slang term means. And a your turn sentence. See if you can spot what goes in quotation marks here. Parotitis, more commonly known as the mumps, is a nasty, painful illness. And I hope you recognize in this sentence that the mumps is going to get a quotation mark. That is simply a slang nickname for the more scientific disease named parotitis. There we go. You do have a practice activity here. I've pared this one down a little bit to make it simpler. The following story contains dialogue, but all the quotation marks are missing. Please insert the missing punctuation back into the story. All you're missing are quotation marks anyway. Each paragraph is missing at least one set of quotation marks. You'll only need to use single quotes once in this entire story right here. We'll actually do the first paragraph together, then you guys will be free to work on the rest on your own time. Agent Zero tackled the president behind the Oval Office's desk, narrowly avoiding the flying knives. He fired a few rounds, then brought the walkie-talkie to his mouth. I need backup in the White House, he said. We have a ninja attack, repeat ninja attack. Open quote. Notice that we have he said to break the quote, so I'm going to follow that rule that says restart broken quotes. And that ends the paragraph. I want you to do the same, just wherever we need quotation marks for the rest of the story, pop them in. Again, you'll only need 1 or 2 sets of quotation marks per paragraph, so you don't have to go too crazy there. As per usual, I'll add in my corrections, or I'll highlight my corrections and add comments inside of this after you're done. Take your time in completing this. You do have a couple of days to get this in.